Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining, the birds are singing, the wind is at your back. Hope you know that there is a real good chance a miracle is about to happen to you right now. We always think that, Ben. You know what? We always think like the worst case scenario is going to happen, but we don't ever think like the best case scenario is going to happen. And it blows my mind. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Benjamin C. George, No Absolutes. You may have heard the No Absolutes podcast. You may have read the No Absolute book. If you haven't, then I highly suggest you do. Benjamin C. George, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Another day in paradise, brother. It's gorgeous here in Colorado. We got kind of like the Indian summer type thing going on right now. So beautiful weather here. Just a slight breeze, nice and warm. How about you,
Yes,
man? How's Hawaii?
it's beautiful. It's such an interesting time to be in Hawaii, and I'm often reminded of all Huxley's book, The Island, and I can't help but think about the similarities between what's happening right now in Hawaii, its geographic location, and that book, The Island. There's so many similarities there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, there's definitely Hawaii's been in the news a lot recently, huh?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I want to premise this episode with what you're hearing today is high octane speculation. I don't know what happened there. However, because I'm of where I am, I see some very interesting things happening, and some of them may be the manifestation of my creative mind, or they could be things that are actually happening. But I just want to talk to you about them today, man. It's fascinating for me to see the world evolving the way it is, and I want to talk about the failure of governments, the rise of smart cities, and the Lahaina model. Ben, what do you think about that when I say that?
Well, I mean, some broad topics, brother. But as always, I'm sure we'll get into them. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some the rapidity of changes in the world of late is definitely just on, it's kind of like a parabolic course. I mean, ever since, well before COVID, but definitely as soon as COVID hit, it was like an inflection point. And, now it's just it's almost turned into like a daily cycle.
Yeah, I think that on some levels, a lot of what we're seeing today are echoes of the changes that happened during the COVID. And when I bring up the idea of the Lahaina model, you know, I'm just using it as a metaphorical model of what's happening, but it's really relevant. If we just take what happened in Lahaina, and I don't know what caused that destruction. My personal belief is that we'll never know exactly what happened, but I think it's a form of creative destruction. I'll put it that way. It
Hmm.
seems to me that the only way to get things done globally now, the only way to really fundamentally change the foundation for society or to change real infrastructure is to burn everything down and start over. And it sounds so horrible. It sounds so crazy and it sounds so callous. But if the entire foundation is cracked, you have to start over. There's no saving the system. You can't save it, right? And let me give you a few examples of of what I'm talking about here. Throughout the United States, or even in Hawaii, or even in the world, there are so many laws, there's so many regulations that have been written that you can't do anything. If you're a business trying to come in and redo the water pipes for a city, well, you have to dance and jump through all these hoops in order to get approval. You got to grease this politician's whose brother works at the county and whose other cousin works at the HECO, or his other brother works there. Like, there's no way to get anything done. And by the time you get everything done, you've already spent 10 times or 20 times over budget. So there's no way to get around it. There's no way for change. I think it was Rockefeller who said something along the lines of competition is the enemy. So what do? You burn it all down and you start over. Is that too far of a bridge, Ben? Do you think that's too crazy? Is that too tin hat?
I don't think it's too crazy. I think there is a lot of validity to that. I could akin it to kind of like a train that just has
Mhm.
massive momentum barreling down a track. You can put whatever you want in front of that thing and it's just going to plow right through it.
Right.
And that could be good intentions, that could be bad intentions, it could be the litany of the idea of change. But there's just so much built up momentum in that system that it's going to keep going until the track ends.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this ever since we really started talking, but I think you end up in a position where the only solution is to have that track end and then build a new system, a new track. I think we're seeing it across industries. We're seeing it from across governments, across nations. And I think, yeah, you touched on it. It has a lot to do with the laws. It has a lot to do with all the red tape. It has a lot to do with those things.
Right.
But I think it's also, where we, how we've done things as a society and what we decided that we were going to value over something else. And, in terms of a system in of itself, I think, it's fracturing and it's going to continue to fracture. I don't think, you can put some duct tape on it and go all good. I think we're reaching a stage where there has to be new ideas, there has to be new systems, there has to be these parallel economies, in order for us to kind of continue on with the life that the global society has kind of created.
Yeah. That's really well said. And it's, a mutual friend of ours, our friend Paul, he's in Maui right now. And when I talk to him, it's fascinating to get to see the way in which Lahaina is finding a way to heal. According to our friend, the government is inept. Maybe it's they're paralyzed with I don't need funds, or maybe they're paralyzed by fear, or maybe they're paralyzed by regulations. But as the smoke begins to clear, what you're seeing is a clear relationship between the private, electric company, HECO, and the government. Like they were working hand in hand together. Like they were part and parcel. It wasn't like one was regulating the other. It's like they were both taking money and looking the other way. And again, this is all hearsay. I'm just throwing this out here from what I've heard. But that seems to be, I've often said that when the instrument becomes institutionalized, that's when the corruption sets in. And that's what you have there. This institution that was to provide power to people, was to do this. All of a sudden it became corrupted. Both sides put their hand out and they walk away like that. And so what's beginning to emerge, and what's beautiful about seeing that thing happen, if there can be a silver lining there, is that real individual private citizens are stepping up and they're coming to the rescue to solve problems. They're not government, they're not corporations, even though both those people are involved, both sides are involved. There's real people that are standing up and, hey, I have this farm. Hey, I have this technology to build these mycelium socks to clean water. All of a sudden, you're starting to see the real leaders emerge. And that's sometimes what happens. Hopefully that's what happens a lot in times of crisis, is that the leaders rise to the top. And it's unfortunate that the chaff of the industry and the chaff of government fall to the side, because we had such high hopes for them. But and sometimes when there's real destruction, leaders begin to emerge. And when I talk to some of my friends in Maui, that's what you're seeing done. You're seeing the people step up, come up and clean things. People that know how to actually do things are getting involved. And I think that's another aspect of the Lahaina model that I hope people begin to see. Is that something that when you read books or when you look at the no absolutes framework, is this some sort of thing that tends to normally happen? Or what's your take on normal people rising to the top in times of tragedy?
I think times of tragedy, times of chaos, that's what creates great opportunity. It creates those moments for people to actually rise, and it's almost you could call it a sad cycle, but also it's the cycle of change, right?
Yeah.
It's if something's so bloated and corrupt that it can't do what it was tasked to do to begin with, well, you need something new. And where does that come from? Well, the bloated and corrupt isn't going to go away until it's kind of blown away, right? Until
Right.
it's shown for what it is. And then in that void, that's where the opportunity to create something new comes from. Historically speaking, there's a litany of accounts of that, and I think we're seeing it. We're seeing that Lahaina model kind of play out in many different regards. I mean, you have, I think of like when Texas has their power problems, all of a sudden people are getting $3,000 electric bills for running their heater during a snowstorm
Yeah.
over a weekend, right? And eventually these things, they come home to roost. That they become so apparent that you can't look away. And I think in that chaos, that's where we do find the greatest opportunities for change and for growth and for evolving this thing we call human society.
Yeah, it's really well said. We have a what's up, Marissa? Thanks for chiming in over here. She says, definitely. I moved to Maui 2 years ago. And even then, long before then, the Hawaiian people were calling for their sovereignty. This is the spark to do it. The electric lines all over the island have to be put underground. Why has this not been done? There has been skimming off the top, or where is all the revenue from Lahaina going? Into restoration and ensuring the safety of the town? It wasn't until now. Yeah, it wasn't until now. In fact, from
Mm-hmm.
some of the literature I've read, Hiko was taking the money they were supposed to be using to keep up all those power lines and keep everything and running and fashioning order and protect people from fires. They were taking that and moving it over to like in a renewable source. So they were robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Mm-hmm.
But Marissa, here is something super awesome I think you'll like. The island of Kauai, they have a co-op over there, and they have the least expensive power in the entire chain of islands. So maybe what can come out of this is this idea that we can co-op the co-op model over there and bring it over here. And maybe that could be a sign for more to come. Maybe we don't need these giant private monoliths coming in and telling us what we should do. Maybe the idea of the co-op is a much better model, not only for electricity, but for all utilities. Maybe that's a new form of self-governance that we're talking about here, this thing that can emerge out of this chaos. Maybe, I know a lot of times the idea of a smart city comes in some people's eyes as a pejorative, like, oh, you're going to get a company dollar to buy at the company store. But if the people get involved, perhaps a smart city could be more like a co-op. On some level, it seems like people are pretty happy going to the Apple campus or going to the Googleplex or whatever it is. Might there be some validity in that model? And what if it was more of a co-op? What if the board organization was sort of like the way a jury works, and you're sequestered to go and work at the board for 3 months out of the year or 2 weeks out of the year? Everybody has a role the same way everybody in Israel plays in the military. So too should everybody play in the government in a new smart city. There's some real possibilities, right, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before, but I've been working on my Terra Libre project, which is kind of a similar idea to this. And the idea is that, you don't need these massive centralized monoliths to, dictate from the top down. All you need is the communication and organization to, leverage the group's buying power in order to get those proper resources to bury the electrical lines underground and have a co-op, or to, get a fleet of fishing vessels to provide, X amount of food for an island, or, just in general, like building supplies. Instead of somebody trying to ship over one container, you can have 30 people ship over 30 containers. And now your cost goes down. And now you can start to build things from a very, individual people for people type level, from a communal aspect instead of from a top down structure. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this. And I've been talking to people around the world who are working on similar type of projects. And I think that one of the key things in all of that, though, is, it's kind of like a code of ethics, a charter for these things, people in agreement, similar to how we have like the agreement of the Constitution. Now it's been kind of drummed down and beat up over the past 250 years. But there's great merit in having that kind of centralized, I wouldn't even call it an ideology, but just an agreement between interested parties who say, hey, I'm willing to help you if you can help me over here. And it's akin to like, the barter system. It's the free market, as the free market should be.
Yeah, we should let's. I was thinking about your Terra Libre project a while ago. I spoke to a young tech entrepreneur named Israel Wilson, and he is sort of following the idea of the Bored Apes Yacht Club in that. And for people that don't know, I know NFTs can sound like they're just like this crazy image of like a gorilla with a banana peel that's like a crappy 2D thing. But don't think about it like that. Think about it like this. Think about a token. Okay, let's say that you, me, Ben, and everybody listening to this, like we all buy this token. Okay, and the token costs like, I don't know, $1,000. But all of us that have that token, like I'm pretty good at podcasting. Ben is an incredible systems guy. I'm sure there's architects and artists out there. Now we all have our token. Ben says, "You know what, George? I've built this system. I got to get it. I got to get the word out. Can I use your audience?" He's got his token. Of course you can. We need an engineer. He has his token. We need an artist. They have their token. In some ways, we're using this buy-in, this token, this image for us to call in a favor to each other. So no money is really changing hands, but we're part of this elite group or non-elite group of similar like-minded people that want to move their dreams forward. And we call upon each other with this token. These types of parallel economies are not only something that I'm making up in my mind, like they're happening in real time right now. And I think that the more people learn about them, the more we can really begin to understand what economy means, what peer-to-peer means, and what the future holds for us. Does that break down into the Terra Libre project, Ben?
Yeah, and I think the way I like to call it these days is a people for people network.
I love it.
And the reality of the situation is the world has gotten much smaller in the terms of communication. Obviously, we're a few thousand miles away from each other.
Yeah.
But yet we're able to have this exchange of ideas. We're able to, understand each other's needs, dreams, goals, and desires, because now we can communicate. So with the shrinking of the world, that also creates the opportunity for these parallel economies to really actually work. All we have to do is be able to say, hey, I think the world should be a better place. I think we should do some more sustainable things in how we operate and how we build things. And instead of all these top-down monoliths telling us, in regulations and all of this stuff, why don't we just say, hey, let's pull our resources together and build for a better good, have a people for people network. And I think crypto has a kind of a central role into that. It has the capacity to decentralize that monolith. And in that decentralization, now you actually build democracy. You have the ability to have a one person, one vote type of system. And you have the ability to make those votes not some grand thing off in DC or some other capital in the world, but a very local thing that can be, it can be voted on instantaneously. If my community says, hey, we want to put in a community garden in our little neighborhood here, well, we don't need the approval of even the city or the state or the government. Our community wants to do it. So, hey, you guys all are in? Yeah, we're all in. Okay, cool. Let's build a community garden. Oh, I'll give up a little bit of my backyard. Oh, I'll give up a little bit of my backyard. Oh, here we go. All of a sudden, now we have a solution to a problem. And I think, the Terra Libre project is, it's modeled for that. And I think there's a lot of other people working on those models because they realize the potential and the power.
Yeah. It's the magnitude of change in that model is mind-blowing. How much of the decisions that are made in your local community have nothing to do with your community, but are made by a multinational corporation whose headquarters are 10,000 miles away from you. Like that is so dumb. It's so dumb for a community to make a decision based on a profit margin by some guy in a boardroom 10,000 miles away. That person cares nothing about your community, not one bit. You're but a cog in the wheel of its widget. It's ridiculous. And I think that type of poor decision making is leading to the destruction of communities, families, resources around the world. The people are waking up to it. This idea that you can have this, the idea that people can be supply chains is an idea that's not talked about nowhere near enough. The fact that I'm talking to you in Colorado, and we can call our friend Kevin, who's probably in Scandinavia or Bali or somewhere around the world, you know, we are our own supply chain. We have the supply chain of information, but I could also order goods through you. The fact that I can sit here and talk to someone, I can talk to 10 different people in 10 different countries in an hour. Like, I am my own supply chain. And when people begin to figure that out, the brick and mortar world of poor ideas and boomer ideology, I don't mean that as a pejorative, but like that type of old thinking just falls away, and it allows the ability of the future to be reimagined. So I hope people begin seeing themselves as more dynamic as the economy, as supply chains, because when you do that, you can really begin to start making changes, not only in your own life, but in your community. And like that takes us back to what I'm calling the Lahaina model is there will be a smart city that emerges out of that rubble that will be unlike anything anyone has ever seen. There's already, last time I checked, I think Bezos was offering $100 million to rebuild. Now let's take this back for a minute. I want to just put in some of the things that I see. First off, the amount of billionaires that are currently moving to Maui is thought-provoking. I spoke with a guy yesterday, a real estate agent, who said that in the last like 8 weeks, he has sold like 6 or 7 bolt hole properties. A bolt hole property is like 100 acres of land or 30 acres of land, some large tract of land that has its own well. You know, it's totally sustainable. One of the people just recently flew in their car collection. So you got to start thinking. I started thinking to myself, like, why would some of the smartest people in the world be moving right now to Maui when Lahaina is a toxic mess? Like, why would they be doing that? And then I started thinking to myself, Larry Ellison is probably one of the smartest people on the planet. Like, I'll tie this back together here. Larry Ellison, if you're watching, you're probably the smartest man on the planet. Here's a man with a company called Oracle, and he has an aircraft carrier. So think about that for a minute. How does a man with a company named, first off, how do you get an aircraft carrier? Well, the man has a company named Oracle. You know, it kind of starts making sense. He kind of bought Lanai, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. But as a young blue-collar kid whose dad was in construction, I realized that you would put up a little trailer on the job site when you were going to develop that property. It kind of seems like he's got a trailer on the job site to me. And look at all these other Amazon just invested huge in these islands. And if you look at the map behind me, you can see that Alaska used to be the jump off point for all supply chains to go. They go to Alaska and then down because it was cheaper. But you'll be much more economical in the long run if land wasn't so expensive, would be Hawaii. You know, if we didn't have, I'm going to butcher this, but I think it's the Logan Act, or it's one of these acts that says all boats have to go past Hawaii to California and then back to Hawaii. You know, and that was something that was made up in times of war. But what if that wasn't true? What if we could get past that? Okay, if you just factor in all these things I said, Hawaii, with its geographic location, with its incredible weather, with its incredible resource of billionaires that have just moved here, be it Ellison, be it Zuckerberg, you know, be it Oprah, like all these billionaires live here. There's more moving here. Like there's hundreds of millions of dollars that have already been invested in Lahaina. Like it doesn't take too much imagination to see what is happening. It is Huxley's The Island. It's happening right now. For those people paying attention, it's the most fascinating time in the world. What's going to emerge from Lahaina is going to blow people's minds. It's going to be the city of the future, and it's the model. And this is what I'm talking about. Lahaina is the model for private industries to build cities throughout the world. Lahaina will become the Singapore of the United States. Lahaina will become the greatest smart city that's ever been dreamed of. We've tried to do them. They've tried to do, you know, I've never been to Dubai, Ben, but I've seen pictures. I think that what we're going to see in Lahaina will be the Dubai of the United States. Am I getting too far out there? What do you think about the things I'm saying?
No, I mean, I definitely see, from the economic perspective, the interest, and then from just a proposed the proposed idea of smart cities. I think that again, back to the beginning of the conversation, through that great catastrophe, now
Yeah.
there's a great opportunity. Uh, you know, I would say that I do question the motivations
Mm,
of building these types of cities.
agreed.
Uh, Obviously, you have a whole bunch of displaced people. Are those displaced people? Do they get a stake in this city that's going to emerge from the ashes here? Um, and so, I think those questions are very important to how these things kind of, and they are going to happen. I mean,
Without a doubt.
there you have all sorts of technology coming down the pike that's going to enable these things. There's a couple companies out there who want to put drone landing pads on people's houses and pay them for it so that they can do deliveries throughout a city. You have all these different types of projects that want to, instead of companies just being able to harvest your data and build these AI models and sell that data and profit from it, they want to pay out individuals for the data that they create. So you have a lot of technology that, under the right premise and under the right model, could definitely benefit a great number of people. And the rising tide raises all ships type idea. But I think it's very important to that the motivations and kind of the code of ethics and how these things are going to operate, who profits from it, who has a stake in it, who become the shareholders of tomorrow. Where are those lines drawn? How what's the real model under the model, so to speak? um, and I think that that's a very important question, and I think that's a question that the world is going to be answering here in the short term.
Maybe it's the cynic in me, but I think the model in the model is the same model. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Employees tend to hate their bosses because employees think I can do this way better than my boss. He doesn't know shit. This guy's a dummy. He sits in his office all day. He doesn't know anything. He's a retard. Dummy. I hate him. That's what a lot of people think.
Mhm.
And so that same mentality is exactly what corporations think about government. These guys are a bunch of dummies, a bunch of retards. They don't know anything. They're stupid. They have all these regulations. They've never done anything in their life. They just run their mouth. So if you think about that, okay, the employee thinks his boss sucks. The business thinks government sucks. Well, it's the same problem. And what I see in this creative model of smart cities is that business is like, okay, we've gotten government out of the way. We did it. But what they don't understand is by getting government out of the way, they have become the de facto government. They've just become the
Exactly.
people they've hated. It's like and it's a metaphor for life. They say
Hmm.
that a kid who's not a liberal a person who's not a liberal when they're in their teens doesn't have a heart, but who's not a conservative when they get older doesn't have a brain. Like we're
Right.
growing like that. So maybe the same way and I'll give you one more beautiful model, Ben. Like if you look at cities that were built in the dark ages, we can often tell who runs the power system by the tallest buildings in the city square. It used to be the castle. The king had the power. Then the church had the power. Now and then the financial tower had the power. Those are the three biggest buildings. And if you go to Salt Lake City, Utah, you can see all three of those things.
Hmm.
And so maybe what we're seeing is the evolution of business into the power structure and simultaneously seeing it fall and this new thing evolve. Like it's like those Bushka dolls, those Russian dolls where you just keep taking that thing out and there's
Hmm.
one smaller and smaller in there. But yeah, I see this as the last step in the business model as an authoritarian structure. Hey, we can run it better than everybody for a while. Of course, when you start something new, the ideas are fresh and you can run it better for a while. But as soon as that instrument becomes institutionalized, and it already has, there's
Hmm.
already too much chaos. There's already too many hands in the pie. There's already too much corruption. It's going to fall. But that brings us to the idea, the law of unintended consequences. And the people that put this creative destruction out there for everybody are the people that are plowing the fields for the new ideas to grow. I see it happening like that. And I can't think of a better, and I mean this with all respect, like the Lahaina model is going to be the model for all of us to plant our seeds in. The soil, while toxic right now, will give way to a fertile ground for ideas to grow in.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I think that's definitely the evolution that we're currently a part of.
Yeah.
Um, and I think as more of these things continue to kind of unravel, as the fractures in the system become, so apparent that you can't not see it,
Yeah.
we end up in a situation where you're going to have those natural leaders, the good ideas that are going to compete in the marketplace, and they're going to win.
Yeah.
And they're going to win because they're going to be better ideas. They're going to be more agile. They're going to be more elegant. They're going to be more sustainable. They're going to take into account the multiplicity of human experience as opposed to the pursuit of the almighty dollar. And so yeah, I think we're in unprecedented times in a sense, but I think again, to what you said, I think this is something that's been pretty cyclical through history as well. You have the evolution of power structures, and I think we're just at the precipice between the evolution of one power structure into another. And I think with the advent of all of this technology, exists an unparalleled opportunity for us to change the world in a very real and powerful way.
Yeah, I love it, and that is beautiful. And I see it everywhere, Ben. I recently spoke with some people. I think I think they have the Moksha Journeys. I think that they have a spot in Colorado. I know they have one in Oregon. But let's just take for a moment the way in which our society has dealt with addiction for the last 60 years. We have used the we have tried to treat addiction with addiction, which is so silly to me. Like, oh, you're addicted, take this pill that you have to take forever. Or we give them these unrealistic expectations of like, okay, you're addicted, you can never do it again. Like, as soon as you tell someone they can never do something again, what do they want to do? They want to do it again as soon as you tell them that.
Mm-hmm.
And on some levels, I think that the societal ills, be it addiction, anorexia, all these societal problems that we have seen are not a problem of an individual. They're a problem of our society and the way
The
we.
structure.
Right. But is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just because of, and I don't think there's some sort of grand plot to the whole thing, but just because of how society has evolved, we've taken away the communal structure of society. We've destroyed the family unit, and in the pursuit of profit, we have found ourselves at a loss for the individual. It becomes people can't even see themselves, owning any sort of land these days, or property, or having a house. Whereas opposed to 50, 60, 70 years ago, that was the status quo, right? And, just the evolution of society has brought us into a position where, these things have become untenable. And, I think there's great opportunity in that. And I think that's where we're going to see real change in these parallel economies rise very fast.
Yeah. It's amazing to me to see the outward manifestation of anger in the human condition. And it started with the Arab Spring, and then you saw the Yellow Vest, and then you saw Italy. And, we can talk about all these things that have happened since the Arab Spring. But what I think you're seeing is a manifestation of anger in the human condition bubbling to the top everywhere. Look at all the strikes that are happening in the United States. Like, they're not covering them, but people are fed up. Like, people don't want to do this anymore. And if I was the people in power, I would be shitting my pants, because it doesn't seem like we're that far from a Robespierrean moment. And I think people understand that, and they're desperately trying to get out of the way and point fingers and on some level cash in. Like, why not? Right. And then that just leads to a faster chain of corruption. Like, okay, these people all hate us. They want us to die. Let's just take their money. Screw them. Who cares? Let's kill them all. Who cares? They want to kill us. Let's kill all them. I know that's kind of conspiratorial, but like, it just seems like there's this outward manifestation of anger that's bubbling to the top. And if I try to have empathy for the people that are trying to control it, I get it. Like, first off, the bravado you have to think you can control something like that. On some level, I guess it comes from a good intentions, right? Like, I care about people. I want to help. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, you know, it's hard to see the good intentions through, through a lot of these different structures.
Yeah.
No, but I think any student of history has seen this kind of play out, over and over. You get a
Yeah.
corrupt power structure, or, whether that be aristocrats or kings or what have you. And eventually the suffering of the people in mass becomes so readily apparent in day-to-day lives that, that a change is forced. And it's usually that change is forced usually by cutting the head off of the snake, historically speaking, right? And I think, and then usually when that happens, you also see, grand overreach in terms of violence, in terms of regulation, in terms of, trying to control things, because that's the only learned response that those power structures have. And the only option left available to them at some level of that game being played out.
So if I put on my Machiavellian hat and I think about the devil's chessboard or the great game, and I look at Maui from a purely speculative point, this is just me speculating. Can I say that enough? I'm just speculating here. So, like all wealthy areas, there's a families that run them. And I think it would help people understand the world better if you understand you're run by a crime family. Okay, just think about your favorite Martin Scorsese film, and that's your country, that's your state, that's your town. You're run by crime families. And power is what runs those families, power and fear. And so that's obvious when you come to Hawaii. Like, it's obvious when you go into any town. Like, there's spots you don't go because of what you look like. It doesn't matter if you're white, you're black, you're Mexican. There's some spots that certain races don't go to because you don't belong there. It has nothing to do with I don't know. Maybe it has a lot to do with racism, stuff like that. But anyways, there's places you don't go. So when I look at Maui, I see an infrastructure that was built there a long time ago. There's people that own that land that's belonged to them. And in some ways, they still have the word chief in their name. Chief of police, chief of the firefighters. There's all these chiefs around, which in a weird sort of way brings us back to this idea of language. Like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay, so think about that. These chiefs, they run that, they own the land. They own the liquor. They own everything. It's a crime family. And I'm not trying to use that as a pejorative. I'm just saying the chiefs have all the power. There's organized crime. And it's probably a good thing that they're organized. Okay, so there's this organized crime syndicate there. Then a new system comes in and they go, we want to, we're going to take you guys over. It's a hostile takeover. Well, that crime family says, fuck you. You ain't taking us over. We'll kill you. And they make some moves, right? Okay. How about this? How about, you want to take our stuff over? How about we're partners? How about you invest hundreds of $millions in our city and then we'll work together? And the big boys say, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But then the chiefs take their money and they say, fuck you, get out of here. Well, I got news for people. When you think you're burning them, they're burning you. And if you're a multi-millionaire who's been in one town for 100 years or 400 years, and an entity comes that's been around for 1,000 years and is a billionaire, you don't stand a chance. You don't stand a chance. Let me tell you this. What happened in Maui was United Fruit Company. Like, think about that. I just want people to understand the relevance of that. What you saw in Maui was United Fruit Company. They brought all the chiefs over to Honolulu. Okay, boys, come on over here for this meeting. Oh, is that your kids dying? Oh, well, son of a bitch. Look at that. Those are all your people dying over there. Remember that money you stole from us? Gotcha. We got you back, man. That was a good one, right? Like, what you saw there was the implementation of raw power. And on some level, there's no like, both parties are guilty. Here's this
Oh yeah.
old crime family that thought they could take out this giant monolith that is crime, and they got crushed. They got destroyed. They got sent back with their tails between their legs. Like, you guys don't know shit. You work for us. This city's going in here, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. End of discussion. We'll kill your family. Boom. And when like, again, I'm just speculating here, but when you start looking at what's happening there, when you see the corruption that happened between all the chiefs, Hiko, all that, they're made to look so horrible. And I'm not saying that they deserve all of that horribleness at the beginning, but the picture that is emerging is that they are incredibly inept. They're ridiculous. They're foolish. They burn their families. They kill their children. Like, that is the story that's emerging. And I could see, like, I don't know, on some level, I could see a mastermind on a small island somewhere, just watching this play out in the 4 seasons. Like, God, these guys are so dumb. I crushed them every time. Just patting himself on the back, like, the city's going in right there, whether you like it or not. And now I know that was kind of way out there, Ben, but that was my speculative hat. And if you need more information, like, why do we have these contracts for a desalination plant, a nuclear plant going into Maui? Like, how long has that been in the works? Why are they coming from Israel over here? Like, that, like, there's just way too many things happening in order for it to not, on some level, have been planned out in a way. I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble with this little rant, but that's what I see happening, man. That's what I see happening.
Well, we don't have to look too far into history to see that same exact scenario play out. In fact, we don't even have to look in history itself. We can look at the cartels down in Mexico.
There you go.
The rise of the cartels. They came in, they made their money, and then they just started buying up the old industries, which were the old cartels families, right?
Yep.
So we have examples of this playing out in real time across the world, and that's just on this side of the world, let alone if you go to the other side of the world. So yeah, I mean, there's historical precedent for things like this, and there is documented evidence of very powerful families and organizations. I mean, one of the most readily apparent one, the Catholic Church. There's a lot of documentation on how they played this game, right? And they incorporated this exact model for thousands of years at this point, or 1,000+ years anyway. So, it is speculative, of course, but I don't think it takes some grand imagination to see that there are, pieces on the game board that play this game at a very different level, a multi-generational level. And I think there's plenty of evidence to support that, the way that they play that game is usually not in the best interest of, just the common individual out there. In fact, they're nothing more than an afterthought, if anything. So, while it is speculative, and I don't think we'll ever be able to know,
right?
We're never going to be able to sit at that table and smoke the cigar and sip the whiskey and hear the tale. But I mean, you can't look at something like this. And so the one that struck me is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not super up to date on Lahaina itself, but a lot of that was declared a historic district, correct? And so in order for any sort of building to happen, that had to be removed. Well, how do you remove a historic district? By the laws in the United States, you really can't. But if it doesn't exist anymore, those laws don't apply.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 1 and 1 often equals 2 in my experience.
Yeah. And how can you tear down buildings with asbestos without getting like an EPA exemption? And, you have to do an environmental impact study, and what about all the pipes that are corroded down there? You know what a nightmare that's going to be to take all that kind of garbage out of there? They'll just burn it fucking down, man. Just fucking start over. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be pretty, but what it'll be best what comes out of it. And it's when you speak to the idea of, will there be any consideration for the local people? Isn't it interesting that the Hawaiian homelands only had 2 houses burn in that entire infrastructure? Like, I just, it's You could say it is the spirit of Maui protecting the people. You could say that. I would like to believe that. But when we look at this idea of creative destruction, it seems so far-fetched to us in the West because we live in a rich Western country. But you alluded to it earlier. Just look at what the United States has done, or look at what giant multinational corporations have done, or colonial powers. Pick your poison. Look at what we've done throughout the world since the beginning of time. We've colonized it. So what? It just seems foreign to us when the colonization machine comes back to where we are. So whether it's this creative destruction in Hawaii, whether it is the opium dens in the Midwest that we have now, it seems atrocious when it happens to you. But these things have been happening to everybody for a long time.
Sure. I mean, one of the most egregious out there, which is the Nestle company.
Oh, man.
Oh, boy. I mean, the amount of suffering that they have individually caused as a single organization is untold. I mean, emptying out reservoirs for, where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people downstream can no longer sufficiently live on the land. Let alone environmental impacts and all of these other things. And, they're not alone in this kind of this colonization of the world from an industrial perspective. And I think, and I think a lot of this is coming to the point where, because now it is coming back home to all of these, quote unquote, rich Western countries and other rich parts of the world too, the chickens are coming home to roost. And now people can see them for what they are, or are beginning to see them for what they are.
Disaster capitalism, real estate acquisition. It's everywhere. Domain. It's profitable. Eminent domain. It's profit. Like, it blows my mind to think that there are people asking the question, why wouldn't you do it? That's so crazy, right? It's super profitable. Why wouldn't you do it?
Well, and that's
wrong.
That's the thing. It's like, sitting around that table having that conversation, that conversation's being had. Is why not do it? If the goal of the capitalist world is profit, then this is how you get some profit, folks. So let's go ahead and do this. Consequences be damned. We have patsies.
Let's have this conversation. Let's pretend like we're sitting around that table, but
you want to steel man this conversation?
Let's steel man the idea of disaster capitalism. Can we do that? Can we try?
We could try. It's gonna hurt my soul, I think. Okay. But yeah.
Okay. For everybody watching, we are pretending to be the masters of the universe, and we're gonna steel man this thing. So join in the comments with us. Okay, Ben. Listen. I'm not saying what we're doing is right. Okay? I'm not saying that. But I think in the long run, for the greater good, we're going to create more opportunities for the next generation. What we have done now is we've already stolen from the youth. There's no way a kid today is going to be able to amass what I have amassed. And it's not right. And I'm not saying I'm innocent. But I think some of the things that we can do is we're the only way to create this infrastructure is to burn it down. There's going to be a lot of people that die. But, I mean, am I getting my point across to you, Ben? Like, it has to be done. This is the only way to do it.
I don't know if I can steel man this church. No, I mean, that's a good take, but I would say, I think that's almost a superficial take of it. I think it would be more along the lines of, hey, look, if we do this, this is going to equate to this much more revenue for us. Well, and then somebody would say, well, what about all the people? And say, what about all the people? I think that's a little bit more true to how that would kind of go, man.
I think you're right.
It's nice to think that, those decisions are made under some sort of premise of right and wrong, of morality, of ethics. But I don't think that they have that foundation of morality and ethics to really, we'll call it hampering their decisions since we're steelmanning it.
Yeah. See, I can't even get there. Like, I can't even begin to come off that angle unless I begin with that premise of like, okay, this is the things I would already begin rationalizing on some level. But if I do look at the model of Nestle, I recently saw a quick, a quick documentary, like maybe 15, 20 minutes. And they spoke about Nestle going into Pakistan and taking the water from a small reservoir, bottling it in like horrible plastic, and then selling it back to all the people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mind-blowing to me to think that sort of devastation on some level gets translated into a 1% profit margin or an increase in an increase in margin somewhere. Like that's the reason why there's so much pain in this world, is that we have stripped the humanity out of all of our business. We've traded imagination for productivity.
Yeah, and we've traded the future of our children for profit.
Yeah.
I mean, in not all children, of course, because the ones who are part of that those large corporations and large crime families, these syndicates, they're going to be just fine. But in doing that, you essentially damn 100,000 times more children to having zero future. I mean, the stated. I think with all of the stuff that's coming down economically, I mean, just look at the inflation rate, across the world.
Right.
People are not going to be able to afford to live without some sort of, assistance from a top-down perspective. And in that, I think you conflate that, or you compound that with things like artificial intelligence now being able to replace a vast multitude of white-collar jobs. Where is the money for people going to come from for them to be able to live, to own property, to build the foundation for their next future generations? It's evaporating as fast as we're talking. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see, and I think this is kind of a more dystopian view of these smart cities. I think you're going to see, out of necessity, some sort of assistance program kind of handed down to the masses. And in that handing down, they're going to forego their property rights in perpetuity, their ability to have, quote unquote, the American dream, which I think we would probably both argue is probably on its last legs or has been dead and gone for a little while. And for most people, right? And so I think what we're seeing from the rise of all of this stuff is definitely a massive chasm of divide between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that's where this is all being pushed to. And I don't think it's some necessarily grand scheme. I think there are schemes within it for sure. But I think, this is a consequence of how we've structured society over the past, ever since the Industrial Revolution. And unless there are solutions that don't require these smart cities and these top-down controls and these Nestles and all of these things to be a part of the system, then I think we do end up in a very different kind of future when we're talking in terms of humanity and people, in the sense of opportunity and the sense of creativity, imagination, and all of the things that make humanity great.
Yeah. The wedge of division I think that there's wedges within wedges, and in order for the top, I don't know, I struggle to say the top 1%, because in the world, you and I would be in the top 1%. Maybe that's
not even the top 1%.
Okay, good. Yeah. It's the people that have the power and the money. They're desperately trying to find ways to divide everybody else. It's like that old game Spy Hunter, when you have the oil slick or the smoke screen coming out the back, and you're trying to get the cars from chasing you. Like, and one of the biggest smoke screens I see is the way we look at the planet. Like for a long time, there's been this divide between, global warming and climate change and all that stuff. But the truth is, everybody agrees that we want the planet to be better. But the people that seem to be pulling a lot of the strings on climate change are the people that are being the worst people towards the climate. Like, it used to be when I was a kid, we looked for pollution. Now we look for CO2. Now, what about all the pollution, man? What about all the rivers and lakes being polluted? What about all that crap? What about all the actual pollution? No. Now we're going to measure these particles, these invisible particles in the air. That's a pretty creative solution to get me and everyone else to look up here instead of over there. And on some level, I think we've all been duped there.
Well, over here started to cut into profit margins, you see. Back to steel manning.
Yeah, totally. Yes, I've heard a good showstopper for when you find yourself in a discussion with somebody who seems to be spouting talking points. You just say, yeah, well, that's company science. Oh yeah, but that's company science. And it seems to stop people in their tracks and be like, oh yeah, you're kind of right. That is company science. But it also brings up the question, what the hell is company science, man? Company science is the vaccine that we've just been through. Company science is smoking is good for you. Company science is that production, that what was the sign over Auschwitz? Like labor equals freedom or something like that. Like that's company science, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is a showstopper in most conversations, which it shouldn't be. It should actually be the stepping stone to, okay, then I think we started to identify the real problem here. And again, back to, the dog and pony show of look over here while I'm doing something over here it's kind of the nature of company science, right? And usually if somebody's trying to distract you from what's actually happening, they're probably up to something that that is no good in the grander sense of good. And, so then the question becomes, okay, so what do we do about company science? And, this harkens back to the beginning of the conversation. I think that's where you're seeing these leaders step up amid this chaos and seize these opportunities that are created by this company science that is, clearly doesn't work. You can only distract people for so long.
Yeah.
You can only say that, hey, there's not a dumpster fire over here. Look at the pretty bird over here.
Right.
Until the dumpster fire is so big that, everybody can smell it.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're just in some very interesting times where company science is no longer going to be the solution to continue on this crazy profit driven capitalist destruction model that's been kind of at the forefront of the world for the past 70 years.
Yeah.
Pretty long on that.
No, it's beautiful. It takes me down this idea, Ben, of, depending on what station you're in, depending on where you're born, depending on what station you're in your life, the ideas, your nationality, your race, the ideas of good and bad and good and evil take on radically different meanings, right? If I was Larry Ellison and I was sitting in the Four Seasons on Lanai and I owned that, and I was one of the smartest men on the planet, I'm sure I would see the world in a way that I can't even comprehend right now. And, it's easy for me to sit here and talk about all these crimes and these horrible things. And I think Nestle definitely fits that category of evil in some ways. But isn't it the investors that want to have more that forces the hand of Nestle to do it? I don't thoroughly understand the way in which all of that works. And I'm just saying, if you were, if you try to put yourself in the position of someone who's vastly more intelligent than you and has much more resources than you, does that change the way you see the world, Ben? If you can accomplish that mental exercise, like, would you be willing to do some crazy things to make the world better?
Well, I think, this comes back to the dichotomy of good and bad, good and evil.
Right.
And I think, those are very mischaracterized in our sense of how we look at them.
Right.
Like you kind of touched on, what's good for me isn't necessarily good for you, let alone Larry Ellison, right?
Right.
And so good and evil are much more of a value judgment based upon one's ideals and their goals. And so I find it helpful to look at things as additive and subtractive. You know, what is this effort that I'm trying to do add to people? What does it take away from people? And and sometimes taking away isn't a terrible thing, right? You have things, we take away stuff and you create beautiful works of art with the dead space in there, right? You have these beautiful sculptures that, because of things were subtracted, you can walk around them and you see an elephant from one angle and you see a bird from another angle and a horse from another angle.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily, a value judgment on one's ideals and goals, but it becomes a practical assessment of a situation, of a model, and even how to, operate on an individual level in the world. So in a Larry Ellison perspective, I could see where, if, you're looking at a large picture of things, you can make the argument of good and bad really easy. But, the argument of, does it add value to the grand total of humanity versus does it take away value, is a much harder justification to be had.
Yeah. On some level, I think the responsibility that comes with having that much power, I can't imagine having to think through the implications of what your one or two actions could do. By having a company so large that if you moved into this part of the world, there's a real cost analysis that you would have to do. Am I really bringing value to this place? And a lot of the times that answer would be no. Like I'm the amount of value that I'm going to do in the long run is way worse than the short-term profit. And I don't understand how once you reach a certain station in life that you can just say to yourself, like, well, don't you have a moral obligation once you've reached a certain stage in life to try to do good? Or see it, goddamn it, then I'm back to good and bad again. There I go, Ben, right back in a damn circle.
Well, see, but that you elucidate a good point, and I think that this goes back to the Lahaina model, the Terra Liberi project, where we were talking about what are the underlying motivations, what's the underlying ethics of these new systems that you're putting up, these smart cities. Is it a people for people type system, or is it just a regurgitation of this top down model where power sits with the few at the expense of the many? And is there some sort of moral obligation that arises when you achieve this power? I don't think so. That has to be, that's going to be an individual factor, right? People can justify away good and bad because it is a relative judgment based upon values and ideals and goals. And you can even delusion yourself into thinking that, hey, I am, this is for the greater good, right? But at the end of the day, if there's not an honesty in that responsibility, and if they're in usually how, if you think about society, how we've really kind of defined that responsibility, that honesty of responsibility has been through things like a constitution, things like the Magna Carta and of different documents that have kind of bound us in a similar ideology and saying, hey, I don't have to worry about George over here coming and stealing my chickens because we're kind of in it for this game that we both agree is how we're playing the game. And so, without those types of, and they're not even binding at the end of the day, right? But they become binding in the sense of if you're building a community or even if you're building a company. And without that kind of foundational ethic and moral backbone, I think it's really left up to somebody's feelings and opinions, which those typically aren't what other people's feelings and opinions are.
A republic, if you can keep it. Yeah, I think it does come back to this idea of shared goals and shared sacrifice. And if I look at my own history as someone who was a shop steward for a long time at UPS, there were times where I would spend crafting an argument to help someone who was wronged, only to have that person tell me, "Look, I don't want to go through with this anymore because I'm afraid to lose my job," or "I don't want to go through with this anymore because I've already worked it out." And on some level, for me, when you get personally involved, you think like, man, I just spent like 3 days away from my family trying to help you come up with a solution that I think will work. And I think you should fight it, because if you don't fight, it's going to happen to more people.
Mm.
And after you go through that a few times, you get a little disheartened. And at some point in time, I could see how that disheartened feeling could find its way into a sort of rebellious sort of vigilante. You know what I mean? Like, well,
Mhm.
if they're not going to do it, then I will, and I'll be the
Callousness.
sacrificial. Yeah, yeah, and
Mhm.
it's and that callousness could turn into a weapon that could be wielded against innocent people, and
Mhm.
you can see the pain everywhere, man. And maybe that's the one thing that binds us, and maybe that's the law of unintended consequences. When devastation happens, is that new abilities arise, and they would only arise if there was this destruction. It's whether it's done purposeful, or whether it's a traumatic event, or whether it's an act of God. I really think that people should be looking to find opportunities in difficult times and tragedies, because that's when the playing field is leveled, and that's when you have an opportunity the same as everybody else.
Yeah, well said. And I think uh, it's something that until those moments arise, it's much easier to kind of, just like the people who choose not to fight the thing. It's just so much more simple to go with the status quo, because if I go with the status quo, I know what the outcome is. If I go against the status quo, it's an uncertainty, and it's that fear of the unknown. And in that fear of the unknown, that's where a lot of people fracture and turn around and go back and retreat. And but it's in those moments of calamity, of chaos, where the fear of the unknown is on equal footing with the status quo. And that's where I think true opportunity really arises.
That's fascinating. I'm glad you said it that way. And as you're speaking, I began thinking about this idea of uncertainty and the relationship between uncertainty and dreaming. When you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, you have no idea what's going to happen. Sometimes you have a nightmare. Sometimes you have a dream that you're floating down a chocolate river on a giant piece of LSD eating mushrooms.
It's quite the dream, George.
Hey, you dare to dream, right? But it's this idea of uncertainty that is in the dream. And it would make sense if we can agree that dreams are uncertain. Then I think we would also have to agree that if you want to live the dream, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty.
Hmm.
And it may mean taking these wild twists and turns down to the demon under your bed, but it also may lead to the fluffy rainbow on top of the cloud playing the harp. And
Hmm.
it is times like these where people either begin to embrace uncertainty, or they fall back and wait until they find a time where they feel more comfortable. And maybe those people aren't ready to embrace uncertainty right there, but maybe you could speak to the idea of fulfillment and uncertainty, and how do you navigate those waters, Ben?
Well, I've always been a bit of a risk taker. And I think that's part and parcel to the entrepreneurial kind of track in
Sure.
life. The first failure is the scariest. The second failure is almost as bad, but by the time you're in failure 4 or 5, it's kind of old hat. And so, and it's not a novel quote, but embracing the embracement of failure, of understanding that in that uncertainty, you may stumble and you may fall. But that's not the end of it. It's when you pick yourself back up, when you take the next step, that's what determines your outcome. And understanding that is a learned experience for me. And I think it probably almost has to be a learned experience for an individual. But it's through that we, these are the concepts of bravery. These are the concepts of courage. These are the concepts that have shaped the foundations of the world that allow us to sit here and have this conversation. And the more that people can embrace that failure, embrace that uncertainty, the more they learn how to pick themselves back up and take the next step.
Yeah, it's almost as if when you begin to embrace uncertainty, you become certain in who you are, or you begin to feel certain in who you are. And that's what radiate out. That is the hero's journey in so many ways, or the realization of a dream. Maybe that's the realization of a dream, is embracing uncertainty. There's a lot in there, and it's interesting that we can get that all from the Lahaina model.
Indeed, George, indeed.
Indeed, my friend. Ben, I love talking to you, my friend. We have to do this way more often. I feel like it's too long of a break that we have had, and I really enjoy the conversation, and I really enjoy what you got going on. And that brings me to the idea of the new book, man. When is that coming out?
put me under the fire.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, so I could say that it's mostly written in various different documents and whatnot. Yeah, it's one of those things where, the idea initially was to write them all three very concurrently because I had the idea fleshed out. But, I've in taking that pause and going down different paths and different rabbit holes of life and, different experiences, I think it's rounding out the next book in a much different light than I originally envisioned it. So that's a long bullshit answer to basically say I have no idea.
I love it, man. I love it. That's a great answer. Yeah, it's such a fascinating time, and I think people should definitely. Do you still have the offer where you're if people will write to you about the book, or do you still have an offer for your book for the first book? Maybe you can tell all my listeners about that.
Yeah, if somebody wants to provide me a review, I'll provide you a free book.
Now we're talking, man. Now we're talking, and I can tell you that the infographics alone in your book are worth the review. They're worth the read. They're worth picking it up on Amazon because it's. Remember the first time I saw it, I was like, what? I've never seen this sort of imagery put together with these kind of words. And it really made sense to me. It's no absolutes. It's a podcast. It's a book. It's a way of life. And Ben, I'm stoked to talk to you, my friend. Before I let you go, what do you have coming up? Where can people find you? And what are you excited about?
Yeah, people can always find me at benjamincgeorge.com. Have a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of secret projects in the works. But the Terra Libre project is picking up some momentum and some steam. So there'll be, more releases for that, hopefully here in the next few months. And excited always about the opportunities that are being made available in the world. I mean, being able to have conversations like this, just on a personal level was fantastic for me. And I think it's through conversations like this and, people discussing things like this that we as a whole actually get to envision some real change and, pick ourselves up and take that next step forward in the world.
Man, that's really well said. Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin C. George, check him out. We'll be back, I'm sure, way sooner than we were before. That's all we got for today. Hang on a sec, Ben. I'm going to hang out with our audience, but I still want to talk to you for a little bit afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this show. Go check out Benjamin C. George. Aloha.